Thank you, Aditi. Your talk reminded me of Dr. Annie Besant's words. She said, to be a powerful orator, you need to put forth all points of views, your views and the opposing views, and bring it to a fruition. Thank you for doing justice to it. The next speaker is another professor. We have Brother Debasis Patnaik. He is from a Hindu religious family from Orissa. Very fond of his grandmother, with his grandmother as guide, and two professional parents, and educated in a Baptist school. He had a all religious educational background to have access to books and life's concepts, which led to inquiries into yoga, queries, studies, etc. From the age of, from class 7 onwards, for over a decade, he grappled with Jiddu Krishnamurti's questions and answers for the youth. It brought him in touch with the Theosophical Society and the messengers like Jai Krishna Patnaik. Now, many of you here would know the late Jai Krishna Patnaik from the KFI. He was instrumental in bringing many people from the KFI to Theosophical Society, Adyar. Every year, religiously, he would bring people here, make them know what Adyar is, and take him back to KFI. So, he always told people the interrelationship between theosophy and Krishnamurti's teachings. Going on to Brother Debasis, he passed the UGSC JRF NET fellowship and completed his PhD on industrial economics from Central University, Hyderabad. He says he could gain access to men and women of eminence like Brothers Kantarao sir, Vacha sir, KVK Nehru sir, Krishnapani sir, Radha Vaniya madam. Many of us are familiar with, knows many of these people. He joined BITS Pilani Goa campus as a lecturer, and he has guided more than 7 PhD scholars and is guiding equal amount of them. He enjoys this journey, and I invite him to speak about a very interesting topic, teacher. Teacher, do we need one to reach or tread the path to perfection? So, over to you, Adi.
Next page. Okay. Thank you, Sri Priya ji, for your introduction. So, esteemed members, member delegates, organizers of this conference, and the office bearers of the Theosophical Society at Adyar, India, and elsewhere. So, of course, I thank you all for this opportunity to share a few of my thoughts. And as Brother Aditi just pointed out, humility is so important, and that is what makes us listeners and learners. And I must admit that I have been learning a whole lot of things for the last 3 days, and of course from earlier days, including preeminent issue of humility from Brother Aditi and from Brother Venkateshwar Rao also, the capacity, the humility to be happy. You know, happiness brings so much of vibrancy into one's character and makes others happy. The topic that is given to me is teacher, do we need one to reach the path of perfection or tread the path of perfection? So, if some of you may be thinking very logically into this topic, then treading or walking the path of perfection, does it mean it is reaching it? Or you have already discovered something which is a benign, a noble, a virtuous path, and therefore once you have set foot on it, you're already treading it. That's like the first step is the last step, because that force, that energy is going to push you forward on the right ways. And of course, as you know, the complexity of the world in which we live makes us distort and move things or in different ways, and yet it is that nature or that feeling of humility and of course the guidance of beings all around us that help us come back to the path. So, what is this path of perfection? Now, even in theosophy and as elsewhere from childhood we learn of bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, karma yoga and various types of yoga systems. Even in theosophy, it would be bhakti, the essence of all the words and knowledge that is available in theosophical literature, which is all inclusive in itself, which is holistic in itself, that could be our path. So, there would be obtained examples of various types of beings developing the society and then helping thousands and millions all over the world come and taste this path, tread this path, search for the elements in this path, and if at all I have to give any example, what better or bigger example can I give than Mrs. Besant herself. Now, yes, we have read this right from childhood. We have got obtained examples all around us. Everybody is striving to take themselves and us to the next point in our movement. Even then I question whether it is possible to be in this path so strongly, consistently. So, staying in this world of misery with chaos, crisis, looming wars all around us, how do we retain our sanity as individuals, as even collective beings, whether as theosophists, readers of particular literatures, and to tread this path of perfection? Now, all of us are being asked to read and study in modern education systems. So, we have developed the intellectual life to such an extent. So, how do we decode that and absorb a life beyond it? Because knowledge itself is seen as a barrier, and knowledge itself is seen as building our self-images, which Brother Aditya again brought out so succinctly, very clearly, that humility would demand negation of those knowledges and self-images. I hope I am interpreting you rightly. So, at least when we joined the Theosophical Society and Brother Sri Priya made a mention of Mr. J.K. Patnaik, I came to the society first time when he brought me here. And there are only two things the society asks of you: that there are beings greater than us, the perfected men and women of the human race, which means it is possible to tread the path. So, at least you start with a little belief, and if we understand our own history, belief about the future, if I can be a little different tomorrow or this next moment, but I must understand that on the basis of what I am and what I have been. So, which takes me to the cycle of karma, understanding of karma, even if I don't understand the full cycle, how it comes back to us again and again, something which we don't understand, and therefore in our quest or thinking that we are doing good to the human race, we actually end up injuring them. So we have to learn these lessons many times over. So then why should we ask this obvious if our experiential reality is so great? Do we need a teacher? So, and as we watch and observe, we see life evolving, forms evolving, which Dr. Besant brought out in a book, Life Forms, Thought Forms, Life and Form. And you bring in Krishnamurti there also, where he says there is only a physical evolution, there is no psychological evolution, no spiritual evolution. It is there. Either you touch it or you don't. And as we said, the teachers are everywhere, and if you read traditional literature, you'll find Dattatreya speaking of 24 type of gurus. So there would be in other places, there would be 7 types of gurus, the Suchaka Guru, the Bodhaka Guru, the Nishedha or Nishadha Guru, which will say what you are not supposed to do, they will say this is right. And there would be the Parama Guru, who would be helping us in our quest for what can be called self-realization. But then gurus, as we said, can be everywhere, from the wasp to the bumblebee to the honey gatherer to the arrow maker, to the Prithvi and the Akasha and the Vayu. So various types of teachers we'll find all around if we keep our eyes and minds and the senses open. So once we are aware that there is a path, there can be a path, or the path towards perfection, then who is the teacher? Where is the teacher? How do we take the help of a teacher? So as you see the teacher, if you meet the teacher, his or her energy would contain the nature, the essence of holism. As it was just pointed out, we'll have to see both sides of the same coin, because there is contradiction in the world and everything is evolving in its own processes. So as human beings, as at least intellectual human beings, or those who have not studied in the world, also get thoughts from diverse bodies, so to say. So what do we say if we put it a little logically? What would you say that when you say you understand a thought? Oh, I am understanding the thought. So our training, our tradition in classrooms would be, the teachers would be happy with our intellectual coding, and we say we understand. They will say, oh, your intellectual understanding is good enough. And our parents will say your understanding is good enough. My child, my ward is progressing enough. So that's our history, and we are happy with this. And that would be the trajectory, the direction of our aspirational practices, which means we are stuck up in this world, we never go deep. And that is the source of the modern crisis. All are trained all over the world in that jargon. So then what happens? We end up, while we say we respect the teacher, we actually end up using the teacher for our own personal benefits, including the religious practices, the so-called mantras, to gain something of this material and psychic worlds. But the teacher, that does not flow into our being. So there is a gap between the teacher and the taught. So one is never one with the teacher. You say that the teacher exists and we follow him, we respect him, but we are not one with him or her. So who is the teacher? What is the responsibility of a teacher? How does he respond to us? Oh, those who have trodden the path, how will I know? How will this individual who is just beginning his journey know? And therefore, cases, it's important that it is not that the junior respects the senior. It is the senior, the teacher, who has to respect the junior and that life. Yeah, sorry. And therefore, the junior, the child, learns to respect, learns to love the senior, the teacher, because it is through that energy that the process of involution or generation, or that energy which can touch the higher energy perhaps, that comes into being. So why does K, and if you again get into K, an extremist way of perhaps people would say, an extremist way of thinking, there is no path to truth. Truth is a pathless land. Why did he say that at all? Because of our own inner contradictions and our way of viewing and dealing with the teacher. At every moment, every step, we make the teacher an authority. So we don't learn. The authority, you are saying, therefore I am doing it. This is where psychological corruption starts, because we humans lose the capacity to experiment in our minds and hearts. Now, the feeling, which should be like a river, feeling towards truth, or our uncertain, imperfect grappling towards the truth, it does not generate a thought, or even if it generates it, it dissolves it. But it rarely, this cycle goes on, this chakra goes on, and we are unable to reach what is used, labeled as universal consciousness, which is the ocean. Because the I always feels that it is separate from others. It's manifest in our own conversations. I am talking to you, and K was so precise when he said, I am talking with you, I am talking together. We don't understand, how can I talk together? How can I talk with you? I am here to make a point to you. So I don't want to learn from you, right? Inner being, you have to learn from me. So these are the contradictions, very delicate contradictions. And even Saint John in the Bible also puts it that we have to be sensitive to our spiritual aspirations. Our spiritual sensitivity is needed. And so which means again, how do we start? Because that step would be the last step, as we have discussed the dynamism of this spiritual movement. So it is positing of this teacher that creates this crisis in the consciousness, because we don't know what is the teacher, we don't know how to deal with the teacher, and we have already brought a barrier into it. And different teachers, different people will speak of different things within different contexts of time and space, differing circumstances, differing history, differing aspirations of individuals, even of authorities, communities, and we are lost. So if we read a nice little book at the feet of the master, they talk essentially of 4 things: discrimination, desirelessness, right conduct, and love. No teacher can give love. Even if they give, we will not understand it, because even while K speaks, it is his energy that brings about a churning. It's only then the word hits us as true. So we don't recognize, say, I understood, I'm an authority on Krishnamurti or theosophy, right? So then we will not recognize the teacher. Now it can be Vachaka, Suchaka, there can be again 7 forms, as we have said. I need not go into it because of paucity of time. But we need to reach out to that state of desirelessness out of which can spring right conduct. But even before we talk of desirelessness, again K has helped us here by saying, Buddha said that dukkha, kamana vinasa, dukkhara vinasa, kill desire to kill sorrow. K said, no, desire is a creative force. Understand it. If you have one desire, no problem. The point is we have multiplicity of desires, and those are fighting against it. And we lose track of the purity or creativity of a desire, which can help us move, oh, I want to understand this. There is no harm in that. But when that becomes a sort of, I want to be better than you, then it becomes a crisis. Now, how do we learn all this? There has to be a little teacher, a little parent, friend, a junior or senior with holding the little hand and say, no, this is where you are going wrong. So they are doing the job of a teacher. That is where we learn from the child. Now, so what would be a teacher? A teacher would be one that entails and embeds all diversities beyond all divisions of race and gainful practices. So there will be many such beings, and even if you look into traditional literature, you will find, let us say, Swami Vivekananda. And we in this age study it and we put him as an intellectual giant. We do not see his words as footsteps of a child's movement. We have merely created an image and we start worshipping this image, and it gives me a sense of respectability, not responsibility. Those are the tragedies of the human mind. Then there can be also similarly an image of the Jesus and authorities of the Bible. You read any religious text, we have made authorities into them. We do not have the capacity to understand the discipline. Discipline, again nicely explained, discipline is something that you are deciphering, learning rather than control. I'm forcing you to learn, I'm the teacher and you learn, not that way. But as you are putting it, am I learning in my mind, or is my mind acquisitive enough in terms of knowledge so that I can project before you that I am authority and you accept that I am authority. Those are detrimental to human movement. So, which means it becomes a very practical thing, and it said there are so many religions of the world. Richard Dawkins, if you read, he'll talk of 3,000 religions, and each of those religions can be related to each of those gods and goddesses, each coming with its own forms and practices at different time periods and spaces, and those are the type of people we have till now. We as Theosophists here and elsewhere, your friends and others, speaking an acceptable language, how can we engage these people with these traditions that define the character of the human race to show the reality of the path of perfection or truth. Finally, we can say the teacher takes the questionnaire through nature, understanding of institutions, understanding of traditions into a state of nothingness. So, knowledge and non-knowledge, where knowledge being limited, it ends. Are we ready for that? Or am I hankering for more knowledge again to push that, oh, I'm in the process of acquisition. So, one has to be very careful. These are subtle ways of looking into knowledge and life. Now, aspirants of organized religions, because mostly you'll find people of different groups, blocks. How are they engaging in spiritual quest? So, you have many other phenomena in human civilization, culture, like cricket or cinema, objects of mass media, which are like religions. It's like the family, we fall back on the family. So, it is like the impossibility of that I, which the I comprises of, to learn from any point or even to move towards what can be called holism. So, who can teach the child that without holism, he or she will not be able to stand on one's own feet, to gaze at future, which can be time, or gaze beyond. So, isn't a teacher necessary to teach the contours of religion, which can mean self-realization? You can talk of practices or the inherent energies or the meanings or the spirituality behind those practices. Yoga system also teaches that. Esoteric literature speaks of that. And today reference was made by Sri Priya Madam about Ravana. So easily from aspiration towards a Rama we become a Ravana, and there in those literature we find the esoteric nadis, 72,000 nadis moving into a certain chakras. When we are treading the spiritual path, what does it mean? Is it a practical thing or is it a very theoretical thing? Because if it is practical, then our every little action, every little word should be bringing in a sort of spiritual energization of nadis, and will be in our quest over time, will be good in certain points, we will not be good in certain points at any point in time, and that is where Radha Panier makes it very clear and explains, okay, you have reached a certain age, you have mastered this, good, find other dimensions, you are not masters of everything, do this, do this. So that was her constant observation towards people. Oh, you are good in this, don't hang on to that. Okay. So, what is realization if not beyond the confines of the self? What is realization that is not capable of looking beyond itself? If you use the intellectual language of inductivizations of any word, any idea or intellectual spirit, because we have all become intellectuals now, we are stuck up in that world and see the world, entire world as himself or herself, because we have divided it infinitely, gender wise, caste, language, religion, nationalities, whatever. And yet, even having understood this, if at all we understand that through so many practices, does it help solve the problems of one's own existential realities? Because we see the world as physical, mental, personal, group differences across nations, sports, literature, sciences. So, there is the inevitability of this teacher in the world, but only those who refuse to accept those roles, those labels given by the world, they stand alone and they can teach. Theosophy and Krishnamurti. When theosophy talks of links between science and religion, it reveals that all knowledge is located in the metaphysical reality, which is a practical thing, which is not a theoretical thing. And when K talks about all knowledge being limited, an ending of psychological knowledge as necessary for love to be, then the query dawns whether one has really ended psychological knowledge at all. So if I have not ended that, am I living in a world of humility, moving in humility? So teachers can help in both these scenarios. Whenever somebody is doing wrong, if you have a right friend around you, he or she will point it out. No, this is, you just done something which is not correct. But when one has to see the metaphysical reality, so teachers help there to this stage, but at the end of the day, it is your intention, your preparedness, whether you want to see the metaphysical realities in yourself. So you have to tread the path at a certain point. You will be left alone, because that's the freedom which is given to the human individual, to the soul, to move an uncharted path. And if you don't do that, if you out of fear or for whatever reasons you fall back, then the teacher may come, teacher may not come. As was pointed out, the word is not repeated twice, then we are in trouble. So it can only mean you or me, the person in flesh and blood, has undertaken the process of living, if we are able to see this. Otherwise, how did one see if one saw at all? That is what K has been questioning or putting before us repeatedly, this desire to see, and if one sees at all. So what is God? That's the question which is asked in most religious literature and all elsewhere. So learning from K, he may say it is, you may worship Rama, Krishna and Shiva, but that is not the final thing. We can say Jesus, Allah, Yahweh, it's not the final thing. And as theosophy uses a language, there is a spiritual evolution, or in our language, mundane language, a meager belief in the notion of spiritual energy. And the soul has infinite capacity to expand that engulfs all nature, all institutions, all world, all ideas. Now, this seems to be an impossible question, again using case terminology. So, because it demands detached action or karma, which is difficult. If one is born unto this space that one identifies with, we have already identified, this is my mother, father, brother, sister, husband, wife, friendship, my community, my India, my nation. So, one has to be careful, one has to just move out of that. So, this idea of holism would demand seeing birth and death as twins. That has to be simultaneously understood as life moves. So, every moment we are being asked to die to the previous, right? So, then life rests and moves and renews itself in an unceasing flow. So, self-transformation, again it was pointed out, should not be to my self-transformation or to another self, I become like you. So, that also becomes limited. So, when one read K, I didn't know at that time, accidentally, one could feel this curdling of brain cells or self-transformation that could be bringing about mutation, which I would not know, those were technical language for me. There will be increase in capacities, you read more books, you read literature, you make friends with great number of wonderful people. Was that an unending stage? Was that a movement into pilgrimage? We don't know, because we get stuck up in the attractions, the temptations of the world, and it's like a state of war even when you have a career. So we still move as battle-hardened people. So are we limited by our own experiences? Let's say as a member of the society, the masters are putting us on the path, and are we struggling to move on the path higher, or are we struggling to come out of the path? Is that a burden, a barrier? So the masters have been liberal, at least, if would you accept that? They are aware of each of the faults, each of our faults day in and day out, yet they patiently wait, because they are not waiting means death, frustration, life not well lived. As it was said, word is spoken once, not repeated, so which means we are gone, there is no one to help us. So, do talking about experience helps, or does it build expectations and imitations of life? So, are we aware of our own quest to overcome ignorance? 5 minutes you are giving? total complete? Okay. So that's the way we are moving into understanding of nature of God, and otherwise we go into institution building and the nature of isms and societal building, but intellectualism is not spirituality, and that Jesus made St. John's book, it's written, the scribes and Pharisees preach and do not practice. They do their deeds to be seen by men, thus the kingdom of heaven is shut. Now, that's the job of a teacher to point out. So there's the division between the inner and the outer, how different religions will look into it. And how do we keep these physical, emotional, mental bodies less solid? Is the religious society becomes a barrier to truth? How many times one feels solid if one doesn't live up to the ideals? Is the state and society different? The state segregates ideas to rule. Societal beings need to be trained to bring ideas to show universal truth. School teachers, college teachers should be agents of a democratic state to do good. Religious masters should need to set society for cultural intermingling and harmony. I'm just completing. So, should there be symbols to signify silence? It was wonderfully put as soundlessness by Madam Sandhya, Madam. So, I've just put this word. A Hasidic disciple, a very ultra-orthodox Jew, that is, was asked when he visited his master to hear his words of wisdom. Why do you visit the master? He said, no, I'm not here to listen to his words of wisdom. I'm here to see how he ties his shoelaces, how he lives the life. So, do we need to symbolize relationships between teachers? Why do we need to give it a name? The sound from the shore, this is the last slide. So, as we said, sound as silence or silence between sounds or soundlessness incomplete. What are the possibilities if one is not subjecting the self to awareness, watching oneself or testing oneself or asking oneself what one sees and why every moment? So, physics would talk of sound. We have learned enough of physics, chemistry, all those sciences. Vedic physics would say physics begins after the sound hits our ear, because there are many stages in which the Vedic physics explains that. Thank you.